All right, hello everyone, and welcome to Track One, Week One of the game Psychology and Games track for the November of 2015 Metagame Book Club. With us tonight, we have Grid, who's showing off her Lenses book with Jesse Shell. Woohoo! We also have Kay, who's running the camera. She probably won't select herself. And then we also have our guest and wonderful lead for this, Sherry Jones.
Hello.
So I'll switch over to the slides and we'll get started.
Cool. Thank you, Chris. So this is our first week for games and psychology. And what I decided for our first week is to jump right in into the big topic, which is regarding game design and psychology, actually. So the title, I just called it Game Design, Creating Psychological Experiences. The title should kind of give you a revelation that there is actually a very strong tie between the two disciplines. So I gave you guys two images here to see. First on the left is Life is Strange. And that is a particular game that actually they have hired psychologists to create. And on the right we have Flappy Bird. And I will show you the difference between the two in terms of psychological experiences as a contrast.
Yeah, and do you have any evidence that Flappy Bird hired psychologists or no?
I don't have any evidence. I just know that there's one guy that made it, and it was in his basement, and that's how he made Flappy Bird.
And he's not a psychologist, right?
I don't think so. As far as I know, he's not a psychologist.
Okay.
So we can move on from the first slide. Okay, this is pretty brief. I'm just going to mention, so all these texts that we're going to focus on is actually assigned already in our week page. So if you see it here, you're welcome just to click on the link directly from our week page. So the first one, I'm excited to go over Sid Meier's actual conference lecture. So he was a keynote speaker for 2010 Game Developer Conference. And his title was Psychology of Game Design. Everything you know is wrong. And in this lecture series, he actually was talking about what he learned from psychology and what he realized that he did wrong as a game designer. So it was very enlightening. We have a couple more: Behavior Game Design from John Hobson. So he's taking from behavioral psychology and applying it to game design. The third article is about extending color psychology to personality realm. This has to do with how color is related to affective domain and also particularly with emotions, right? How it affects your emotions. So we can go next. Okay, three more text. The first one is psychophysiology and psychoacoustics of music. Sounds scary, but the psychology of sound is also known as psychoacoustics. So we'll cover that. Unfortunately, in our webinar, I can't really show you any music, but I'll just talk about theory, okay? The fifth one is video games. Do you play better with sound on and off? And that's a controversy, which is whether or not sound actually leads you to become a better player when you're playing a game. And the last one is cognitive flow, and yes, it is associated with Mihai's flow theory, and they started to call it cognitive flow in the game design world. Okay, so those are the first six. So the first question, and I post this on the page, is why are game developers interested in psychology? Now, I'm going to go straight to answer that question. Okay, I'm taking immediately from Sid Meier because I was quite happy to see his lecture series, but this is what he briefly said here, okay? He says, gameplay is a psychological experience. Straight out the gate, he says this, okay? I base my games on things like railroads, pirates, and history, and I try to make the games I design true and real. The more historical, the more realistic, and the more factual, the better. The more railroady and piratey, the better. But what I thought I knew was wrong. During the early days of my career, I hadn't taken into account what was in the player's head. By acknowledging that simple concept, that gameplay is a psychological experience, it can make your games better. So what was happening in recent years, and actually some game designers already know, but in recent years there's an explosion, realizing that, you know, if we're trying to sell games to players, shouldn't we try to focus our design on the player as in what does the player want, needs, what would make them happy. Shouldn't we think about that when we make a game? So when Sid Meier said this, which is gameplay as a psychological experience, he made it clarify for everybody, you're not using psychology to analyze games. That's not what we're doing here. We're thinking about how psychological principle can help us make better games. So we can go next. Okay. So he also said this. He says, people who play games are egomaniacs. It says on the box you get to control armies, discover new technology, and create entire civilizations. So right away, you're an egomaniac. Very applicable to his game because he's the famous game developer of Civilization. And that was pretty much the best screenshot I can give you guys. And basically, when you make your city inside Civilization, you can also blow it up because you have a god complex. So he was talking.
How much do we believe him on this?
Well, I mean, I've experienced playing Civilization, and yes, you kind of have this feeling that I control everything, and the way the world's going to be is based on my command, right? And I think part of it. And don't take it wrong, but I think Minecraft, the attraction to Minecraft is because I control the world. There's that agency. But Civilization, there's also this element of, world destruction. Minecraft, right? Minecraft, you destroy, rocks and spiders, but it's similar, okay, in that it allows you to control your world. So we can go next. Okay. So this is kind of interesting. I'm not going to read this whole thing, but what he said here is that he realizes player psychology has nothing to do with rational thought. And in this big, long text, which you guys can read on your own later as the slides will be available, is that he was talking about trying to reason with players, the player testers, right? So when you're making a game and you're trying to figure out if it's going to be sellable, you usually hire some players as testers, beta testers. They will play the game and give you feedback. And what he has discovered was that even though the math works out well on his end, as a developer, he put the math in so the points would total to a certain point, the win and loss rate makes sense. The player got emotional and didn't really like it, even though mathematically it was reasonable. So he realized, and this is another part I highlighted, he says, something is going on there, but it's not mathematics. This is what led him to think about how I should actually understand player psychology when I make a game. And when he started looking at player psychology, it fundamentally changed a lot of elements in his game design. So I'm going to go next. Okay, this is from Hobson. And he said, and I'm going to skip along here, the psychology underlying how players learn and react to the game is a constant. The study of the mind has actually come up with quite a few findings that can inform game design. So the biggest point is that he's trying to make, also he realizes the player is the central focus of game design. You're not making a game design for yourself. I mean, you could, but essentially if you don't care about your audience, you're the only one who's going to play that game. Very similar to, for example, in a writing class. You tell your students, you want to write a paper with the audience in mind. If you don't care about your audience, you're not going to persuade anyone, and no one's going to want to read your paper. So game design is on that same principle now, which is let's change our focus to the player. So we can go next. Okay, so I'm going to start talking about this thing called psychology of attention in games. And attention particularly refers to our attentional system in the human mind. So there are certain ways that we pay attention to certain things, and I'm going to go straight into that. Okay, so there is a theory called the spotlight model of attention. The idea is that human beings have attentional systems based on based on our senses, which means when we think about attention, attention is not just based on what you see. So most people think it's visual, but our focus of attention, sometimes we pay attention to what's happening, has to do with also our audio, our what we hear, also to our skin, maybe some wind whip by really fast and we can feel it against our skin. Those are all senses, and they actually attract our attention. Okay, and there is a metaphor that helps us understand how human attention works. It's called attentional spotlight metaphor. Particularly, it's our ability to pay attention to our environment. Using that metaphor, we attend to a small amount of information at a time, meaning that if we're in an environment with there's a lot of details, we can't pay attention to everything. It's not possible for us. Our brain can only focus on a small amount of details because the reason why the brain does that is trying to get that information and retain it, memory. So if you take too much in at once, the player doesn't, or the person who's paying attention doesn't really have the ability to capture everything, okay? It's like taking a photograph. You might take a photograph and focus, but if you say, I travel to Amsterdam, and you stand there and look at the scene, you're not going to be able to absorb every single detail of Amsterdam. In fact, one exercise you can do for yourself is if you can remember exactly what the front of your house or apartment look like and draw it down and draw on a piece of paper, you'll be shocked if you compare with someone else's drawing of that same spot, how different that would be. That's because we only pay attention to things that is important to us, because important in that it has meaning and it helps with our memory. So that's called the intentional spotlight theory, and that it looks like a spotlight and kind of expand. That's what I mean by that.
I have a question.
Sure.
When you're talking about all this, your senses, the thing that came to mind for me was the casino. And when you go to a casino, it's very noisy, and you hear the bing, 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 and you see all the flashing things, and oh my gosh, it looks so exciting. But it's not. They're not good games. They're really stupid games. They're mindless games. You just push a button, and eventually, sometimes you win, but the house always wins. So you're never. And I'm just wondering if the studies are the same, and certainly it's all about your senses, the noises, the colors, and all that, as opposed to a game like, say, World of Warcraft or Guild Wars. So are the same studies being applied?
Let me say it in this way, which is, we're kind of jumping ahead, but this is wonderful because you brought up the casinos, What the casino did, that was they perfected this, which is attention direction, and that they're directing your attention with those sounds and also color clues. And that's going to be talked about later too. But basically, what they did very well is that when we hear visual cues or audio cues or colors and whatever, those are instant feedback to tell us that we're doing something correctly. So casinos have those machines that constantly give us those feedback, and we like the feedback, so we like to keep on playing. And that part of it has to do with addiction. It drives addiction for people who have addictive personalities. So let me clarify something for us. Even though this was not in this lecture yet, I want to clarify that addiction doesn't happen to everybody just because you put, a casino machine in front of someone. You tend to have an addictive personality in order to be addicted to something. So it doesn't mean that we're machines and that you put something in front of us and we're going to naturally get addicted. People who go to Vegas who get addicted tend to have addictive personality where they can get addicted to cigarettes or alcohol, anything that's addictive for them, okay? For the rest of us, if we don't have that personality, it wouldn't matter to us that much. But in short, going back to your question, what casinos did very well is that they understood that those visual cues and audio cues and color cues direct our attention, because we can't focus on everything at once. So listening to sounds and stuff direct our attention to go play that thing. Okay.
So Sherry, I just wanted to say, but we hear all the time from educators, when we're trying to get them to play a game, they go, oh, I couldn't possibly play that game because I would get addicted to it. What do you think about that? And actually, Tanya, I'd like your opinion on that too. Will your fellow educators get addicted if they play Ingress or Candy Crush or World of Warcraft?
Either, okay, and Tanya, I can go first, I guess.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm gonna state my case again.
Okay.
You cannot just be addicted to everything. I'll use myself as an example because certainly I should be talking from my own experiences first, right? I like to play games. I mean, I do research with games and I study games, but I myself am very disciplined. I tell myself, okay, today I'm gonna play Candy Crush Saga. And I'm going to play 30 minutes, and that's max, because I got to stop and then go grade papers. So I have a timing thing down because I don't have to get addicted to it. In fact, if I don't play it for 2-3 days, I'm not going to get sad, okay? But I know some people who, away from that for a while, they will start missing Candy Crush Saga, and like addicts, they will want to go back to playing it. So we can't automatically assume that just because you put a game that is addictive and that it does all the bells and whistles. For example, Candy Crush Saga does a very good job with audio and color cues. I mean, it's all color, right? And these matching and whatnot. It's very addictive for us. It's that constant feedback, instant feedback, instant feedback. That is what feeds the addiction, actually, okay? But if you don't have an addictive personality, like I hope myself, do not, I don't tend to get addicted to all kinds of stuff. So yes, go ahead.
I mean, I hear people say, using the addiction word in almost a playful way, oh, I'm so addicted to that kind of thing. But then it's really a negative thing. It isn't good to just need something that you really don't need, kind of thing. But I don't know. I just think that the press sometimes puts out these things and it's catchy and it's a good read and people don't completely understand it, nor certainly do I. I think you can be involved in it. I mean, I go to the casino on occasion, and yes, the sounds are fun, and gosh, when you win, that's kind of cool, but I quickly cash out because I know it's going to go back, kind of thing. And I don't know, I just, like Sherry said, I think if you have that kind of a personality, I mean, people could say I'm addicted to walking because I walk every day. Is that a bad thing? No, I don't think so. It's healthy, and I make sure that I walk every single day, and I do feel bad if I don't walk. But, I'm not ready to, like, slit my wrists or anything.
Right. That's a bad image. You have to be, I think for some of us, as you become more mature as adults, you start to develop a discipline. You discipline yourself and your behavior. And others, they're not as disciplined because they haven't trained their mind to think in intervals. That has to do with that interval reward schedule thing. But anyway, you have to think in intervals and then time yourself. So if you don't have a strong sense of time, there's some research that thinks that a person who doesn't have a very strong sense of time or timing tend to get addicted because they don't know when to stop. And usually it's a time measure too. And some of us have good sense of time, others have lagging in time. And I don't know if you guys knew that, but our sense of time is actually different. So, for example, what you think is 1 minute, I might think 1 minute is actually 3 minutes because my sense of time is slower. So our perception of time is also varied. And those factors, there's so many factors that can contribute to why someone is addicted to something. But the other thing I want to talk about too is in terms of education and learning is essentially addictive in that you get feedback when you do something right. You go, yes, awesome, I did something right, I'm going to keep on learning. It is addictive. But if a person is principled, they will say, okay, I'm going to stop doing that now. I'm going to do this other thing. I think that's the differentiator. Okay? So I think I was already saying in this next slide already regarding sensory cues. And for game designers, and as well as because I also teach a game design and psychology course for my students, I often tell them that they need to think about how they will incorporate sensory cues to help the player finish a level. Because sometimes we have rage quits, right, where people play and they get frustrated and they don't want to play. Part of it is that some players don't know what to do in a game. If the game is badly designed in that it doesn't give us visual cues or audio cues or whatever cues, the player will stop because they don't know what to do anymore. So part of the game design strategy is to think about how you would get cues to help them. So it alleviates player frustration. It directs the player to the place they need to go, because if it's a spatial model, you need to direct the player to the right place. And also giving the player a sense of progress. So depending on how you give the visual cues, you want to time it correctly in that it can't be too short in length or too long in length, because if it's too short, then the player would just go, well, there's so many cues I can ignore some of them. And if it's too long, the player would go, well, where's my next cue? I don't know what to do anymore. The sense of time is also crucial in getting the player to get to the right place and continue playing. Okay. So next. Okay, so regarding gameplay and memory, this is fascinating. There's a process in psychology called priming, and it's about how we attend to things we already remember. So the example in some of the video that I assigned this week is that if someone call you in a party, right? So let's say there's 10 people between myself and another person out there, and there's many people at the party, and I don't recognize everybody at the party. But if someone calls my name, because I have a memory of my own name, I will pay attention to that person, even though they're 10 people away from me. So that's what we mean by priming. And it's very interesting, though, the relationship with gameplay and priming, which is when you give a player a new game, and this game provides familiar cues that was used in previous games, it actually helps the player play it because the player has previous memory of games that are similar to the game that they're playing now. So I'm going to give you a couple examples to show you what I mean. Okay, so the images are not great, but they were supposed to be dark anyway. The first one on the left is Resident Evil, the very original one, okay? And the scene you're seeing right here is, I call it the bathroom surprise. When you go to the bathroom, there's a scene where it says remove the plug, yes or no. So when you remove the plug, you know there's a mechanism there. And I believe that in that scene, you got a key to open the door. Okay, so this is an old game, Resident Evil. On the right-hand side, it's actually Silent Hill. And that's also the bathroom surprise thing. Silent Hill is much newer as a game. But when I remember first play Resident Evil and later playing Silent Hill, I saw this thing, and it says, there's something in the toilet. Should I grab it, yes or no? It immediately reminded me of Resident Evil. And in fact, I knew that when that prompt comes up, I'm like, there's a key in there. There must be some kind of secret I'm supposed to get. Either there's a monster that will pop out, or there's a key. So you see how the player memory, games actually builds our memory, it's associated with memory, and the way we learn to be better player has to do with our memory space as well. So if you're an expert player, most of the time expert players have played a variety of games and they're very familiar. So they apply their skill set from previous games and put it in the new game. This is what in educational field we call scaffolding, right? But this will be an example where the bathroom exemplified that. And here's the next one. Here's another one. All right, Flappy Bird comes back again. So this, yay! Okay.
There's a basic structure there, right?
Yes, you see the basic structure. My favorite, Super Mario Brothers. This is the underwater level, okay, and you can see that Mario swimming and try to get coins. And then some people go, wait a second, I know how to play Flappy Bird. There's the pipes, and I just have to make the fish, whatever that, or actually bird hop between the pipes, because I remember playing this in the underwater level. Even though that's underwater and that's actually, you know, in normal space, the player naturally understood, oh yeah, I played this game before, so I remember how to play this new game. So this would be an example where old memory affects, you know, game design. So game designers who are really smart at designing this stuff will actually use similar sound effects or similar visuals or similar animals or whatever to kind of help the player remember how to interact. Now I'm going to bring it back to the panel though, because you guys, you know, have played lots of games. I don't know if you can remember games that have references, past visuals, past sound effects, colors.
The one thing that I can think that came to mind was in Ingress with the glyph hacking. basically you get, first you get 1, then you get 2, 3, eventually you get 4. I've not had more than 4, so I don't know. But you get these quick images of a squiggle that connects these dots, and then they go away, and you have to remember them. And it gets more and more difficult. Well, there's squiggles. Every single one of them is a squiggle. If you name the squiggles, smiley face, upside down house, open box, things like that, and you repeat them, they're kind of easier to remember, and you do better with the glyph hacking. It's just a strategy that somebody told me, and I think it's the concept you're talking about.
Right. Oh, that's a really good example, actually. But similar, you're relying on old information to kind of help you play the new game. And Ingress is a very new game, really. Yeah, that's a perfect example. I don't know if in WoW, if you guys played any RPG before WoW, because I know everything is WoW now, but before WoW, if you play card games, and come on, there's a lot of theory to how card games apply. Can you guys think of anything? I mean, even D&D, for example.
Well, yeah. I mean, World of Warcraft is, people can argue that World of Warcraft is based off of Dungeons and Dragons. So, I mean, there's a lot of the similar races, things like that. I mean, for me, the memory that I get is in the navigation of a game, because I played a lot of PC-based gaming. So for me, using the WASD key is just pretty much second nature as far as driving, and actually, I really can't stand using arrows to move. So I mean, for me there, but yeah, I mean, platformer games I usually equate to Mario Brothers. It's being able to have that ability to switch direction in midair, things like that. You use those different experiences to shape them. Like even when I just played, last time I talked about Never Alone, is that a lot of figuring out how to use those players was very similar to Mario Brothers, and trying to find where the platform is to jump a certain distance, and being able to figure out the key switch. And then it was also, you saw the ability to sort of double jump, things like that, from other games as well. So yeah, there is also the wonderful 8-bit melodies of the 80s games and 90s games. You hear them whether it is in popular film or you hear them as sound effects, and that brings back memories of the various different games that are out there that I've played in the past.
Awesome.
So yeah.
Yeah, perfect. Relating to the psychology of attention, too, going back to what we were talking about, is this should show us that, because I was specifying that we pay attention to things that is important to us. So particularly in a game, games have this unique ability to focus our attention. Because if you don't focus on particulars, you'll die, in the game. So it has the ability to train us to focus on things, and this is why psychologists are so interested in what games can do regarding attention. Most students have, there's too many distractions. Like one of the arguments against social media and a lot of technology is students are constantly distracted. But when you're inside a game where there's environment and there's dangers and there's challenges that you have to focus on, and you have to understand certain sequences and pay attention to environmental cues, it trains you to pick up clues. This is why they're so interested in what's going on here. But anyway, and last note is, most of us, when we think about game-based learning, and we've been advocating game-based learning at Metagame Book Club, is that game-based learning is thought of as scaffolding within the game, as in level 1, level 2, level 3. The truth is that when you play games from the past to present, that's actually scaffolding too, but most people don't think of it that way. Okay? Yeah, go ahead.
Well, another thing I was going to say is just, this is part of the reasons why frame games are so effective for a lot of people, is that most people experience, they have experience with Jeopardy, Wheel of Fortune, Price is Right, and so whenever people create the PowerPoint Jeopardy or some other game show equivalent, then your students are familiar with it because it's something they typically grew up with. Well, I guess it depends on the age of the student. I don't know how many people are watching Drew Carey on Price is Right, but the thing is that there's lots of different things you get there as far as seeing that carry over, especially when you start looking at game base and the gamification of education.
Awesome. Thank you very much. We can move on from this slide. Now we're going to go straight to color. And I know I've been talking about cues, but there's a lot more to color than just cues. So Please go next. Okay, so there's a lot on this text. I'm not going to read it all, okay? But regarding light and colors, okay, there are lots of psychological theories right now regarding how light and color affects us. So Rorschach test, right? Rorschach, he stated specifically in the color, okay, colors emit to emotions and a more responsive behavior towards colors indicate a greater affectivity. So they use color and the way we respond to color as a way to measure our emotional states, you know, how emotional we can get. And then we have Jung, yay, Jung came back to the discussion, that he started to equate color and feelings because of theirs regarding perception and expression. He's conflating the two. So he thinks that color and feelings are actually completely the same. And lastly, the quote here mentioned also about phototherapy for depression diagnosis. Particularly, the patient is exposed to a potent source of light in order to make him or herself feel better. And we know that when you're in sunlight, it makes you feel better because of the sun. And also the research does show that places where it doesn't have sunlight for a long period of time have higher rate of suicide. So this particular quote, even though it's bulky, tells us that color can affect emotion, whatever color you use, and also light versus dark can also affect us. I mean, they're not colors, but the gradient of light and dark can affect us too. So next. Okay, now this is interesting. Regarding red, red is particularly studied, okay? Red has to do, and this is the big argument here. This actually was not about video games. This is a whole separate research. And one caveat I have to say, okay, there's not that much research, particularly about the psychology of games. It really is a few psychologists and game developers trying to study psychology to understand how to bring that into game design. So when you guys are going to do your own studies and going to do your own research on psychology, you might have to look at psychological theories that have nothing to do with video games and try to understand how they might influence the way we understand video games. Because the flow theory originally has nothing to do with games, but somebody started to go, hey, I can start to put flow and to understand how games work. So this particular thing has nothing to do with games, but what they've discovered based on research is that games can actually influence achievement, performance, or personal attraction. So if you wear red, some research shows if you wear red, you appear more attractive and more powerful to people, right? And if you wear a certain color like black, you seem more powerful. So those are. Yeah.
We were at a conference today, and people were hanging up their coats. It's the Western Interstate College Higher Ed, and no one had a coat that was other than black, except I had a red jacket, and I hung up my red jacket.
Well, the red makes you very attractive. That's a good thing.
Oh, okay.
That's a good thing. Yeah, but black naturally, you know, it's recommended since black. Here's the irony about the color black. Mm-hmm. If you wear black, you do seem more powerful, but at the same time, you look conformist because everyone's wearing black. You look like you're more docile to the authorities. So that's your little paradox. So if you're at work, you probably want to wear black or interview first day, you probably want to wear black to impress your employers. But if you constantly wear black, you give off the impression that you're docile and you have no leadership quality. So it's kind of weird with color black.
Well, you know, red is positive and black is negative. You know, from the electrical standpoint.
Oh, yes. But look at that. Look at that second quote, Chris. Talking about positive, right? It says that the color red may be associated with hostility. So when we see red, we actually associate with anger and hatred, and you know, it actually gets us more angry. And in fact, the part that I didn't include this in the quote, but particularly testosterone, the higher amount of testosterone you have, the more red face you will get. There's an association with that, and they noticed that also in primates and other animals. You know, when they have high testosterone, they turn red. So red is associated with hostility. So that's interesting, right? So I'm going to go next.
I have a question before you go on, and I'm curious about if it changes based on age at all? Because as educators and trying to design games, and I know that you work primarily with young adults, but if you're working in the K-12 population, are these concepts true for them too? You know, the red and the yellow and the, you know, that kind, the black. I mean, I think children are frightened by black, I would think, whereas an adult might think, oh, black is powerful. Actually, I know somebody who just packs black and white when she travels because it's easier. She doesn't have to think about what she's going to wear, and everything goes with everything.
Right.
But I think children would think it's kind of, that's just my thinking. But I wonder, is there a difference between a child, say, under the age of 14 and an adult as to how they would react to these different colors?
I want to clarify that a lot of psychologists at least admit, okay, in terms of this particular quote was talking about physiological, in terms of biology, okay, that testosterone is driving it and so forth, so they're talking about biology. But other psychologists acknowledge that our emotional response to color is also culturally affected. So in terms of age, there are some studies, but not a lot, regarding how children see it versus how adults see it. But most of the discussion is generally, this is how you see it in this culture versus the other culture, because children are affected by their parents, right, and the adults that they're with. So yes, the colors do influence you this way, but there is a difference between using a big old splash of color versus using them as codes. So I'll explain that in a bit. So I don't want you to think automatically you can't use red. I mean, you know, there's all kinds of colors, but if you use completely red, like a giant red room, that might scare the children. It will scare me too, really. So next. Okay. Here's interesting, okay? So this might be interesting for you to think about how red is manipulative. This is from Madigan. And what he realized, and he found from the researchers, okay, regarding competition, red has to do with aggression and dominating, but he said here, based on research, wearing red, the researchers argue, essentially makes it just a little easier for you to get pumped up and visualize the kind of behavior that wins bouts. And the competitor in blue might compound the effect by perceiving his or her red opponent as more intimidating or imposing. So the research shows they were doing a study on sports, so basketball players and football players. And what they've noticed is that when you wear red jerseys, you tend to come across as more intimidating to the other team. And there is a win ratio in that. If you wear red, you tend to win more games. This was discovered, so this kind of messed up, right? So, but what he was saying here, what he was trying to interpret is that when we wear red, maybe the aggression or the adrenaline pump up make us think about how to be more competitive. So it get us more competitive. And people who wear blue jersey or other colors kind of feed into that myth in that the red are more powerful, so they start to play their role. So there is research that indicate that if you wear red, you tend to be more dominating toward the other colors. So in video games, they actually tested this as well, that video game players who are playing with red colored characters tend to win more in bouts, you know, and assuming that the game is designed fairly, right? The players tend to win more versus other colors like blue. Blue is more neutral. Okay, so next. Okay, so talking about black. We tend to associate black with negativeness because villains all wear black. And this is a cultural concept, okay? So this is not, oh, genetically we must feel this way. But specifically, what's quoted here, Madigan said that those wearing black, a color typically associated with the wardrobe of the villainous, were found by referees, so football players, basketball players, referees to be more guilty of infractions, fouls, and rule violations relative to those wearing light-colored jerseys. So this is based on data, which is the referee will actually call foul on players wearing black more than any other color. So it's actually not very good for you to wear black. That's what the color theory has shown us. So we like to believe that we have 100% control over our decision making, but what psychology is showing us that a lot of this is unconscious processes that's making us think one way or the other. So in games, obviously, these theories actually apply as well. Okay, next. Okay, so game design implications, right? I wanted to emphasize that colors can be used to direct the player's attention. And this is also for Madigan, because Madigan has been writing pretty extensively on psychology and games for a while. And what he discovered was that there are games use color as coding. So rather than just as emotional persuasion, they use a little bit of it as specific scenes to indicate where the player needs to go. So in the game Mirror's Edge, they use red objects, and I know that's probably hard to see, but red things, red object doors, whatever, to help the player understand they need to jump on that to get to the next level, to get through the level, right? The other game is called Last of Us, and that one's kind of a zombie game. And they use a lot of yellow to direct the player through the level. So there's like yellow paint, yellow light, yellow whatever. And they also use this light. So this is an example where you're not using red to make player more competitive. I mean, there is that element there, but if you use it specific as a color coding, which is consistent, that all these objects are red and all these objects are yellow, it basically turn it for the player just to pay attention and go, okay, I need to touch that, jump on that, and so forth, as color coding, as leading them through a level. So if you can go next. Okay, so this is just to show you shots. The left-hand side, that's Mirror's Edge. So that was, you could call it a platformer game, where the player is jumping on the red to get to the next platform, right? So it's like free jump. And far in the distance, you guys probably can't see it very well, but there's little red marks everywhere in the building. So you have to jump on building, jump down, left and right, and so forth. On the right-hand side is Last of Us. And this particular scene, although it's not yellow paths, but it does have light showing through the forest to kind of guide the player to say, okay, I'm going to have to walk in that direction because that part is light and probably zombies are not going to show up and attack me there. That is the use of how light is used to direct our attention, and also color is directing our attention to how to play. Okay? So next. Oh, and Grid had a great comment there, that little children are attracted to red crayons until their teachers use it to mark their paper up. See, that's a great example of cultural influence, of how our memory, right, our memory association also affect the way we perceive color. I don't want you guys to think that there's some kind of scientific automatic thing with red means this and green means that. It's more as a revelation of how our own culture perceive these colors, because if you go to another culture, you know, red does not mean the same thing as over here, like hostility and competitiveness. Okay, so talking about psychology of sound in games, so this is where we're going to touch up on that other word, psychoacoustics. So we can go next. Okay, psychoacoustic, that's just another term for psychology of sound. So you're using psychoacoustics there because what they've discovered is that human beings also get data about their environment based on sound, based on what they're hearing. So if you're going out to nature and you hear crickets around you, you probably don't think this area is going to be dangerous. But if you hear growling off to the distance, that gives you audio data that tells you this place might be dangerous. There might be a wild animal that will come at me. So you see, we perceive information not just through the visual, like most people think it's just reading text or something, but we sense it through all of our faculty to understand how we are supposed to behave at certain times. Okay. And next. And Chris, you want to talk about those examples? I'll let you talk about them.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I was just thinking when I was hearing you talk about psychoacoustics, is that a great example would be the music in Jaws and Psycho, even though they're on both sides of the sound continuum. You know, with Jaws being the very deep cello music and driving through it, and then Psycho being the high screechy piece to it. That, you know, using that sound, you know, everyone starts to, you know, once you've seen Jaws, you know, you go, okay, yeah, now we know it's, even though it might be scary or you might be thinking something's happening, unless you hear the sound, you know, nothing bad's going to happen.
Oh, yeah. You know, some people might argue, oh, it's just conditioning. It's conditioning. That's why you hear the sound in Psycho with that high-pitched screeching sound. Okay, that's dangerous. But, you know, actually, there are other theories that talks about how certain pitch and certain tone can make us feel very uncomfortable. So whatever that doesn't sound good can give us really bad vibes. So you could say, yeah, it's part conditioning, but other parts actually, if it makes it screeching sounds for you, that's really unpleasant. Yeah. Yep. Okay. So this part is just talking about fear, on how sound drives fear. And a lot of people love horror games, and particularly horror games are not really horror games unless they're trying to manipulate audio or sound effects or music. Granted, there are horror games that does not have any music at all, but they still use sound effects to scare you. You know, those jump scares, okay? And classic conditioning, they're trying to show, this quote just trying to say that they have demonstrated how sound can be associated with fear by messing with a rat. So every time they play a sound, they give the rat an electric shock. So the next time the rat hears a sound, it's going to be horribly afraid of that sound. So that's the classic conditioning piece, right? But fear is also a learned response. This is more of a scientific explanation of how fear comes about. So that's the learned response part. But I'm going to talk a little more in the next slide here, exactly how that sound works. Okay, so this is from Tan. And what is interesting is this. She's not trying to do an analysis of which sound does what. But what she has discovered was that music and sound combination can influence the player's performance. So sometimes we think we're really, really good at a game, but really it's because of the music and the sound that's driving us. And what they did in an experiment was that if they turned the music and the sound off, the player who were originally doing well tend to perform very badly the next time. So they discovered how sound and music is extremely important to give the player a sense of awareness of what they need to do in the environment. This is classic behaviorism in psychology, right? How do I behave based on external stimuli? So external stimuli has to do with that music and sound telling me if I'm doing something correctly. So that's behaviorism there.
And I would like to pull Tanya up, at least on audio, if not camera, about a comment that she made when you first started talking about sound.
Okay. Well, when I first started
camera
playing,
too.
Wow, and I remember sharing this with somebody because, you know, the sound was on and this beautiful music, and here I am, and I felt like I was in this movie, and I was, you know, the heroine of this movie. I was the star, and that's how and obviously I wasn't all that great, but I felt like it because the music, you know, told me that I was awesome.
Okay, yeah, good, right? So you give a sense of, you know, I'm awesome because that feedback is giving us that piece. You know, adding on to what you're saying here, and I'm not trying to knock gamification. I'm not. But what I'm going to say is this, is that when gamification is reduced down to points and badges and leaderboards, and noticing the psychological research that tells us, trying to engage someone is a lot more complex than just giving them points, right? Because that's only that. But going back to the casino example you gave us, which is excellent, right? What did the casino perfect that a gamified class sometimes cannot do? Visual cues, audio cues, colors, you know, the point feedback. So there's many, many elements that they're offering to us that get us to keep playing and sit there for 15 hours if we have to, right? That's what the casinos are doing. But a gamified course, if it's just plucking a part of a game, like let me take an element here and let me take that element there, and then to call that engaging is not really recognizing, or just a general lack of knowledge of what makes people engage, what makes people respond. So these kind of theory can help us improve our game design or gamification design down the road.
Well, the other thing about the casinos is that a lot of them, you know, it's funny that they're using a lot of bell tones, which it makes you just think of Pavlovian dogs.
Yeah.
It's like, well, everyone's heard of Pavlov, so if we ring a bell, they should know what it means.
Right. No, well, that's what we're basically Pavlov's dogs. I mean, we're basically in Skinnerian boxes, you know. When we're playing, basically the biggest criticism against casinos is that they're creating this little Skinnerian boxes, so we just keep playing and respond, playing and respond. There's no meaning to anything. It's not like you're learning anything, except the skills. Maybe you learn to press the button a few times and you get something. You get the illusion you learn the skill, but, you know, casinos randomized. So that's why it's not meaningful. But there are still certain lessons we can learn from what the casinos are doing to add on to meaningful activities, okay? Because meaningful activity without that, it's just, it's not as engaging. So, next. Okay.
I was going to say, Skinner boxes, I guess, are better than Schrodinger boxes.
Okay, true, because then you don't even know if it's real or not, so that's good. So, yeah, at least you know you're real. So, this, I'm just re-emphasizing myself. We kind of already said that, games, music in games and audio effects in games can tell us information about the environment. So, if you're in a forest in the game and you hear ominous music, maybe like the psycho music that Chris was talking about, which is the stabbing sound and the high-pitched sounds, you might think that the forest is very dangerous due to the sound effects that you hear. But if it's calming and there's nature and music, then you might feel safe. Now, there are what we call troll games, where game designers, independent game designers, will make games where they go, I'm going to play a soothing music, and then all of a sudden the monster will come out because you didn't expect that. So they were playing with your expectation. You think the music says, ooh, bad things will come out, but when you actually play, you go, oh, what the heck? Why is this monster coming out? There's no audio cues telling me this thing is going to come out. There's no growling noise. I just got killed. That is what we call those trolling games. Anyway, yes. Have you guys played one of those trolling games?
I have, but quite honestly, I look for that kind of stuff. I keep waiting in the games that I play for something that's very innocuous, like a snake level 1. I keep hoping for the day that the game company's gonna turn it so that all the level 1 snakes start attacking, and they turn into. I like surprises.
Well, yeah, that's to the point. Yeah, that kind of surprise, but it gets old very fast, right? Like, trolls you, and then, oh, my expectation is this, and then I give you something else, kind of like a lie to kind of mess with you. Actually, I do have a lot of those kind of games. Maybe we'll assign some of them and make people angry. So there's a lot of troll games out there. Okay, so anyway, we can go next from there. Okay, this is our last bit. So both Chris and Kay have talked about flow, in previous session of our book club. I mean, flow is pretty darn important. I just want to emphasize this part because this week is really called, how game design creates psychological experiences. Necessarily, I kind of have to mention flow again for our session. And it'll be rather quick, so I just want to briefly overview this. Okay. So I'm just kind of getting in from Baron. So Baron noticed these 4 things. Now, if you actually read Mihai's papers, it's a lot more extensive in terms of his rules. But what we get out of that is that challenge and skill has to be balanced, because if something is too challenging or it takes too much, too much skill set, it's not going to work for the player, so they get out of that flow zone. So flow is when you're intensely fixated in the activity that you're trying to do, and you forget time and space momentarily at that moment when you're playing or you're doing some activity, okay, favorable activity. So he put out four things here in tasks. So he put out that you have to have concrete goals with manageable rules. You have to demand action to achieve goals that fit within the person's capabilities. So it has to be within that person's skill set. Third is have clear and timely feedback on performance and goal accomplishment, which means people will stop doing something if they don't get immediate feedback saying, oh, I'm doing this correctly. So sometimes when you are building something and that thing look like it's looking to the shape that you want, that's feedback to yourself saying, I should keep doing this thing, right? So fourth is diminish extraneous distraction, thus facilitating concentration. This is a big one. So I wanted to bring it all the way back because most people miss this point when we're talking about flow, okay? Flow does require elimination of distraction. We just talked about the psychology of attention and how players are constantly being distracted by too much stuff in a game, right? So if a game designer does not pay attention to the fact that the player can only focus a small chunk of information at a time, and they don't feedback as in cues to tell the player, you need to go here, you need to do that, you'll lose the player. This is why players quit games. So those cues are very important because it will help the player weed through the distractions so they can focus on the task at hand. So I'm going to go next there. So Barron kind of turned the flow theory into game design. I kind of like his little chart, okay? What he thinks makes sense here. So he goes concrete goals with manageable rules, plus goals that fit player capability, plus clearly and timely feedback, as in timed correctly. We talked about feedback being short or long that can influence the gameplay, and also eliminate distraction for cognitive flow. That's pretty important. And I hope our discussion today regarding attention is helping us think about how even classroom design, how we're going to direct attention of the students to focus on the task at hand. And just giving them a book sometimes is not going to do it. So there's other things that we have to think about regarding cues. And I think that is it for me today. And I'm asking if the panel if you have any more questions or any feedback or comments about this week's lesson.
No, I agree with Grid. Grid made a comment when he started looking at the pieces of flow that it also sounds like 4 rules for basic instruction.
See, that's why I say that, you know, I know that when I said, oh, we're going to talk about games and psychology, what does this have to do with, you know, teaching and learning? It has lots of relevance. And also by understanding psychology, those debates about what's good gamification, what's good game-based learning, and all that would be clarified when we start to understand how each element affect a player in certain ways or affect a student in certain ways.
And I think that's also because we're going to be doing track 2, and as Tanya pointed out, we're doing the art of game design. And in the beginning, the author of the book, Jesse Schell, really starts talking about it's not about the game, it's about the experience. And I think that's a lot of where we can pull that into any kind of classroom. It's about the experience. What kind of experience are your students going to have? What kind of experience do they learn best in? What role are you going to play? What role are they going to play? And one of our questions this week for discussion was, and it's Lens 2 from this book and from the free app, it's what is the essential experience that you want your students to have? Because quite honestly, if your students are in a philosophy class, if your students are in a history class, what do you want them to take away? Is it just about a date? Is it just about knowing about a certain philosopher? Or do you want them to take more than just that? Is it just declarative knowledge? What do you want them to do? And that's where I think we can learn. I mean, some of us get it, you know, implicitly, but sometimes, you know, we do have to be explicit, so we're not just doing the stage on the stage.
Well, I want to clarify one thing too with Schell's Lens 2. I want to take it further in what he's saying there, because he's not saying it. He's trying to be. Let's say he's trying to be considerate of everyone's position. But really, what I would say is, if you're going to teach a psychology class, for example, are you going to tell them to memorize theory, or are you going to tell the student to live through the theory? If you live it, it's very different because you're experiencing the theory and see how it actually works. That's how I design my courses, is that I'm making the students experience it rather than, let me memorize what that philosopher said, which has nothing to do with my life because I don't get it. That's the problem with education. You're making people memorize theory that has no relevance to their life, when theory was supposed to describe how life is supposed to be or understand some truth about life itself. So when he says player, the focus is on experience, really, he's not really saying player, but it's synonymous, okay? It's really about the player. So when we design, it's not about ourselves. It's not about how awesome my knowledge base is. It's about how my student is going to receive my lessons. That's really important.
So any other comments from anybody? Tanya? You're muted, Tanya. Either that or you're miming.
No.
One or the other, muted or miming.
No, No, I'm good. I have things to think about. I'm going to go back and look at the lenses and keep reading. Thank you, Sherry.
Well, thank you, Tanya. Awesome casino reference. I love that.
So thank you very much, Sherry. Everybody, go to the Metagame Book Club. Look for Games in Psychology, Week 1. It's okay if you didn't read the stuff already. Go and take a look at it now. So thank you, everyone. Bye.
Bye.